Okay, so we put together this presentation. After we finish, feel free to let me know. I can send it out to each and every one of you, so you can just always have this. Feel free to use it as necessary. But we're going to cover as to why nutrition matters, the types of nutrition approaches. We're going to talk about your body type and therefore allows you to be able to tailor your nutrition based upon your body type. That's actually known as somotypes. And then really speak about the factors that impact the nutrition that you need. And then we're going to talk about something known as RMR, which is a baseline measurement of the calories that you need and then excess calories afterwards. And then we're going to talk about how to actually measure the quantity. If we go to the next slide, one thing I do want to point out is that if you notice on the Instagram photo, and this was something that was posted, it's a picture of me and I was in Hawaii last year, and I was on the top of Cocoa Head, and I took that photo, or someone took a photo of me there. I was at the leanest I ever was, and as I was sharing with Alexis and Karen, just because one is lean and ripped doesn't mean that you're actually fit. And an example of that was at that point, I was roughly about 9% body fat. And at the same time, the person who I was working with had me on a daily calorie count of about 1,900 calories, give or take. When the open came up, I could barely last 2 rounds for 20.1 and 20.2. And at that point, I decided, hey, let me just go off of this, calculate my own macros, and eat accordingly. And then my scores increased for 20.3 through 5. So the point is, this isn't about getting skinny or focusing on the aesthetics. This is really about nutrition to maintain and to also help us as it relates to where we see ourselves in our lives and as an athlete. And as you can see on this slide, nutrition is the baseline of everything that we do. In other words, many of you have heard us say or heard people say, you can't out-train a shitty diet. It's really what it is. So as much as weight as you're lifting, as fast as you're going, at the end of the day, if your sleep and your nutrition and our nutrition is not really dialed in, it really is burning the candles at both ends. So the focus of this is really to focus on that baseline and that of the pyramid that supports everything else that we do. If we go to the next slide, here's just an overview as to many of the things that some of us have heard over the years. Some people have said, I want to do paleo, zone, keto, etc. So what I did is I actually just gave a little blurb as to what the distinction is. One thing that I do want to point out, because I'm hearing a lot about keto, if we can go to the next slide. I've heard a number of individuals who've asked me about, well, is keto the right diet or approach to take? I like to say approach as opposed to diet, because diet does give the connotation as if you're trying to cut something out. But really, it's what your approach is and why. And I'm going to ask you always to think about whatever your approach is, think about the why you're choosing that particular approach. But for keto, one thing I do want to point out, because it's something that is often not necessarily spoken about in the media, is that keto is high fat, not as high in protein. So I do want to point out that distinction. So in some individuals who are doing keto, 50% of their calories are coming from fat, 50 to 60 to 70%, 20% roughly about from protein, and 10% for carbs. The reason I say that is, while keto may, depending on what your goals are, may work in some instances, also understand it can also have an impact on your performance as an athlete. It just depends on who you are. But I just want to point out, in many of these approaches, whether or not it's vegan, Mediterranean, paleo, zone, or Atkins, or keto, there's pros and cons to each. And some of the things to do, aside from measuring everything else, is to really pay attention to your performance, measure how you're performing throughout the day with regards to work, how your sleep is. And like you said, some of these measurements that we're starting with this challenge see where those test and retest results actually yield, and see if it yields the results that you're looking for. Okay, let's go to the next slide. You'll see that I also included Atkins and also keto. Again, you can see the distinction that I stated here. If you are choosing an approach and you would like to have some further conversation, feel free just to reach out to me, and we can talk offline as it relates to addressing some of your approaches. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so many of us have heard this baseline approach. This is something that you hear at a level 1, CrossFit level 1 training seminar. And the first part of nutrition basically is eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugar. Okay, keep intake levels that will support exercise and not excess body fat. In particular, I put this on here as a baseline, understanding that some people may choose to have a vegan or vegetarian diet. So again, there's substitutions to this, but some of the same ideas still play into effect. And what are those ideas? At the end of the day, we have to have protein, carbohydrates, and fat in order to make sure that our body is actually exercising or moving, exercising efficiently in order for us to accomplish the things that we wish to do. If we go to the next slide, let's take a look at what your body is or your body type is. And this will really give you an estimate of the type of macronutrients that you may need. So there's 3 types of body types. It's an ectomorphic, mesomorphic, and endomorph. Ectomorphic, as you can see here, it says naturally skinny or long-limbed. Primarily, you'll see individuals, if you've ever seen somebody who's a climber, boulderer, etc., they tend to have long limbs, etc. If they fell into that body type or somotype, then the estimate for them would be 25% of their calories should be proteins, 55 roughly about from carbs, 20% from fat. If you notice and you take a look at this, this may be somewhat similar to almost like a keto diet, a ketogenic diet. So it's just something to pay attention to. Again, as ketogenic is something that is often spoken about in the media, this may be better suited for a certain type of body type and a certain type of activity that they're doing. Mesomorphic tends to be individuals who are roughly in the middle, what they call mesomorphic, naturally athletic and muscular. So if you build muscle quickly, then roughly it's about a 30-40-30 split. And an endomorph tends to be an individual who may be somewhat shorter but thick. And those are individuals who tend to engage in certain type of sports, such as rugby or power type of sports, such as power lifters. Some of them may be, you may see some individuals, even including Olympic weightlifters, who may fall into this somotype. Because of that, then it depends on how you actually want to shift the diet, that you may actually have more of a 35, 25, and 40 split. Okay. So what factors impact the amount of nutrition that we have? So if you take a look at the top on the right-hand corner, you'll see something that says RMR, which is basically your resting metabolic rate. That is basically what does it take, what calories, how many calories does it take for you just to function doing nothing at all, right? That includes breathing, sleeping, walking, etc., laying in bed. What's that minimal? Contrary to what some people may believe, that is actually higher than some people think. So I've actually had my RMR tested, and for me, it's 1770. So remember when I spoke about earlier, I was on using calories, and it was roughly about 1900. Well, if you subtract 1900 from 1770, that basically meant I was surviving the excess calories, was on 123 calories a day. Like, what is that? That's not healthy, and it's not sustainable. Okay, so that RMR really You can get that from either doing a test, a specific test, which is actually putting a mask over your face, laying down, and they actually test that over 15 minutes. You can get that at the same place where you can get a DEXA scan at Body Spec, or they often have something that's, if you do get a DEXA scan, they also have that included on the bottom of your body fat measurements if you are getting measured, right? Otherwise, you can take a, DEXA scan at Body Spec. So, or you can also take an estimate of that amount based upon your body type. And again, I can also reach out if you have any questions about that. I can also help you figure out, get an estimate of what that RMR may be. Your physical activity, that's also a way to measure what you actually may need. An example of that may be, I'm going to use Cindy. So depending on the same time or the same workout, if you do a test and you do a retest, how your performance occurred at the beginning and the retest, that may give you an indication as to whether or not you're high or below your calorie count as to what your body may need. Side note to that, whenever you're doing a test and a retest, always think about the same day, same time of day, just to make sure that you're being very accurate or close to accurate with regards to the conditions in which you're testing. And then the final one, which is TEF, which is it's a more complex mechanism of actually testing what your needs may be. TEF is a little bit more complicated. So for the purposes of really understanding the amount of nutrition that you need, if you're interested in this, I can also reach out to you, but on your RMR and physical activity, that may be the easiest way to really take in or have a baseline understanding of what are your daily calorie counts. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so your precision nutrition is two really focused approaches for some individuals to use to determine what's the nutrition they actually need. You can see here I have a link from Precision Nutrition. PN is also known as PN for those of us who are certified. PN is probably the world's largest nutrition education company. You can actually go onto this calculator and type in some of the factors such as age, sleep, activities, and it will give you an estimate of the amount of nutrition you may need. If you're looking at TDEE, this is what I was speaking about earlier in terms of the complexity. This is when you take a look at the amount of steps you get in a day, or your workouts or activity outside of the gym, plus your basal metabolic rate, which is also gathered from the amount of air that you're breathing within a certain period of time. You can see it's somewhat complex. Nonetheless, I've added it here so you can calculate this. One thing I just recently learned as a side note, you can actually, if you have an iPhone, you can actually measure your steps. I wasn't really a person always focused on steps, by the way. However, while being in shelter in place, I came to realize that I did have to get extra activity in addition to working out to really make sure that I'm capturing the amount of calories that I actually want to burn. And quite frankly, coaching at night helps me with that. So I keep my phone on me and it actually counts the amount of steps that I take. But for those of you who are into counting steps, you can do it either on your iPhone, or if you have you can have a watch, or if you have a Fitbit. It just gives you an idea if you're going to calculate your total daily energy expenditure. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, resting metabolic rate. This is something that we spoke about earlier. It really focuses on the composition of your breath in order to actually determine your oxygen consumption. And this is what is really, it really gives us a sense as to what is your baseline that is needed. A lot of this is also based upon the fact that your breathing at night also is correlated with the muscle mass that you may have. And so, and also your weight. So again, here's a link that you can feel free to use it. If you're signing up for a DEXA scan, I think I may have a discount code somewhere, so I can also send that to you if any of you are interested in that as well. Okay. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the money slide. How much food should I consume? A lot of people are interested in how much food should I consume. So the first thing is, do you have to measure food all the time? Second question that I normally hear is, do I have to be aware of the quantities that I eat? And should I measure and scale my food? Well, it depends. The answer to all of this is it depends. So do you have to measure your food all the time? In some instances, it depends on what your goals are. So if you're really looking for aesthetics, if you're also looking for performance, maybe, but not always, right? And at the same time, not everyone's always going to have a scale around. So sometimes you're just going to take a ballpark estimate. Do you have to be aware of the quantities of food that you eat? Maybe. And should you measure and scale your food? Again, it's up to you based upon your particular goals that you may have. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so with that said, all right, so what do we measure and what do we need? And that depends on the type of nutrition approach that you're going to take. And as you remember, there's a minimum level of calories that your body needs just to function, okay? So if you're choosing what is your lifestyle or activity level, I'm just giving 3 different particular examples. If you're sedentary, that means you have a desk job. If you're moderately active, meaning that you're a police officer, EMT, paramedic, firefighter, or if you work in construction, healthcare, food services where you're always on your feet, that would be considered very active. So it just gives you a sense as to what is your lifestyle. I get it. A lot of times CrossFitters, we want to say, well, I work out. I got it. But the majority of your time, if we're sitting at a desk or standing at a desk, we're sedentary, okay? Also, if we take a look at the baseline for understanding about calories, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. 1 gram of protein, 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs, 4 calories. And I put in here 1 gram of alcohol because some people just get drink. So let's just keep it real. All right, so 7 calories, just keep this in mind, right? I don't personally drink, but some people may, but it's just something for you to keep in mind. Are you going to weigh and measure your shots? I don't know if you will. It depends on what your goals are, okay? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about different approaches. You have macros. Some people may prefer to focus on macronutrients, and that really is focused on the amount of proteins, carbs, and fats that are in our food and based upon the calorie needs that you may have. So you can determine what your ideal macronutrient breakdown is. And in order to determine that, the first thing I would say is that you choose the body type that you have. So if you go back to the slide and you remember that slide that I spoke about as far as an ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph, that will be, you determine what that ideal macronutrient breakdown is. As an aside, if you're asking this question, somebody asked me this question once, which was, how do I determine what my body type is? There's a real simple way. If you look at the back of your collar, if it says small, think of it as ectomorph. If it says medium, mesomorph. If it says large, extra large, extra large, endomorph, okay? That's a baseline worst case scenario, okay? Now, if you like to wear baggy clothes, I can't help you. I'm just saying, that's just the baseline information. Then you can actually, how do you track your macros and calorie intake? You can use something like MyFitnessPal or another one called Chronometer. So if you go to the next slide, as you can see, there's a way, if you go back, one slide. Thank you. Once you have your baseline calorie needs, also based upon your activity level, then you can actually enter in what your macronutrient breakdown is. So what do I mean by that? So for about 2, 3 years, I've been entering my stuff in on a daily basis in MyFitnessPal. And in essence, what I do is I go in, I adjust, here's the calories that I'm taking in, and then I'll break it down based upon the percentage of proteins, carbs, and fats. And then it sets up what my total calories are for that day, and then I know how to track it. And then once each meal I have, then I begin to just plug in the information. How do you actually upload your information? You'll see that there's a bar scan. The same thing exists in many of these, that if you're preparing food, all you have to do is scan the food using a QR code. It'll upload directly into MyFitnessPal or any of these others, and then it automatically becomes something that you can track. The reason I say this is I'm a boring eater, so I tend to eat the same thing every single time. So I remember when I first met Joe, I'm going to use you as an example. Joe shared with me that he grew up eating boiled chicken and rice because he grew up, parents owned a gym, right? So if you eat the same thing over and over and over, you pretty much are going to have a baseline understanding of what the calories are, the amount, what's in it, etc. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So how do you weigh and measure your food? It depends, right? For some of us, I'm going to pull this up. A friend of mine showed this to me after he made fun of me after going to Hawaii. This, as you can see at the bottom, this cost about 29 bucks. But I carry this actually everywhere. This is just me. Other individuals prefer to have something at home. I actually also have the scale on the top right. You can actually type in the actual type of food that you have. It's a code, and it'll actually give you the macronutrients on the actual nutrition facts on the right-hand side. So it just depends on the scales that you want to use. I tend to want to really know what's in my food, but for some people, they just want to weigh and measure it. That's fine as well. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Let's say you're not interested in that. Let's say you want to use the zone method. The zone method, as we spoke about earlier, is really a method of measuring the amount of your food, but it's very different than macronutrients. And in particular, as you remember, I just spoke about for a carb, 1 gram of carb or 1 gram of protein, it's 4 ounces, it's 1 ounce is 4 grams. And under the zone, it's very different. It's measured by grams. So 7 grams of protein roughly will be 30% of the calories, okay? 9%, and these are just blocks. These are what we call blocks, individual blocks. So for example, if you have 1 block of food, then that would really equate to 7 grams of protein, 9 grams of carbohydrates, 3 grams of fat. But if you had a block that said you need to have 5 blocks of food, then you take the 5 and you multiply it by 7, 9, and 3, and that'll give you a better understanding of saying that you need 35 grams of protein, 45 grams of carbohydrate, 3 grams of fat. A word about carbohydrates. As an aside, you have many types of carbohydrates, and carbohydrates basically a food that actually translates into sugar. That's the bottom line. But the reality is, if you have pure sugar, it goes directly into your bloodstream. But if you have carbohydrates that are really fruits and vegetables, then it's fiber. So then the amount of sugar that's entering into your bloodstream actually is a slower rate, and it doesn't spike your heart rate. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're going to get your carbs, think about or consider your carb source coming from fruits and vegetables as opposed to processed food or pure sugar. Okay, how do you actually calculate? I'll get to that in a minute. How do you follow your blocks, and what's the period of time? Think about it for a 3 or 4 week period. Now, this is an iterative process because you're going to be determining whether or not this is working for you or not based upon your aesthetic, but then also based upon your performance in any type of workout, etc. So let's go to the next slide. So again, how do you calculate what you need? You can hit right onto the Zone diet. There's a calculator there. Also, there's another calculator that we've included, and you can also see what your actual blocks will be over a 3 to 4 week period. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an example. They break it out for a genetically, they break it out based upon female to male, based upon biological type. So you can see again, how do you determine what is the appropriate blocks that you may have? Look at the back of your t-shirt, right? So if it's small, medium, or large female, these are the estimated and recommended blocks that you would have if you're following the zone diet. If you're an athletic muscular female, you'll see again, here's what the blocks are. You can modify and play with it. Again, it's an iterative process based upon the performance that you're seeing as well as aesthetics. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a distinction here with men and women. And you'll notice that there's also an extra line called hard gainer and large hard gainer. That is symbolic of the ectomorph that we spoke about, somebody who may be long, tall, long-limbed, but also skinny. So this is what they would actually need in order to execute or actually function under a zone if you're taking a zone approach. An athletic, well-muscled male, it's 5'5", roughly give or take about 150, 175 grams of protein, give or take. But again, it's an iterative process. You may bump up some things or cut down on some areas based upon that ongoing feedback that you're getting from the aesthetics or your particular performance that you wish to accomplish. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so common tracking mistakes. Words matter, so the specificity makes a difference. So if you're just typing in a medium apple, what does that mean, right? So think about, if you're using macros, by the way, think about weighing and measuring. So for example, I tend to eat Honeycrisp apples, and I just know roughly that's about 225 grams. That's because I've weighed it over and over and over and over, right? Otherwise, if you don't add the weight, then you're not going to get the specificity perhaps that you're interested in. If you are eyeballing, think about how do you eyeball certain portions. So as a framework, a palm in your hand of protein is roughly about 4 ounces, okay? A thumbnail is roughly about an ounce of body fat. And an entire cup really is about 5 ounces, give or take, of carbohydrates. So worst case scenario, you can just always, if you just need to think about something like that, just think about what would fit into your hand, on your thumb, or your actual palm of your hand. The other thing is there's a distinction between what is raw or cooked weight. And so I just added this calculation just for you, for those of you who want to be so specific. You have the ability, if it's raw to cook, you can multiply it by 0.75. If you're going from cooked to raw, then it's the other way, divide by 0.75. Or forgetting to log your food. Here's the other thing. Unfortunately, we're all in shelter in place, so we may not have to worry about this as much, dining out. But the thing about when you go out, you don't know what actually is in your food, right? And then sometimes it's an ability, you have to really try to figure out what is actually in your food, especially if the food, carbs, protein, and fat are combined. It just depends on how specific you want to be. And then also using generic food entries as opposed to logging individual ingredients. So if you know that there's other things added to it, ask the question and think about tracking those things as well. Again, doesn't have to be, you don't have to be anal about it, but if you choose to be, that's okay too. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what tracking methods could you use? You can use a written log. You can use MyFitnessPal. You can also use the chronometer. I personally never use the chronometer. I use MyFitnessPal for everything, personally. For written logs, sometimes if I don't have the ability of to quickly jot down a meal, I may just put it in my iPhone specifically what I had, and then I just go back and log my food later. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here we are, questions. So I know I covered a lot. This is dense material, but what questions do you have? What myths can we do Mythbusters with, if any?
I got a question, Chris.
Sure.
This is Joe. I saw a meme a while ago about, lifestyle, the inverse relationship between lifestyle stress and your sort of nutrition goals. Mm-hmm. And it was a really good picture on, how annoying you are as a person when you just try to follow your nutrition goals to a T down to every sort of gram. And I thought it was a really good depiction of what the reality of attending to these things is. And when you've done it for 2 decades, it's a little bit easier because you kind of have a measure of how to monitor your food intake. But do you have any recommendations for people, like on just general sort of social? Well, I guess we're not doing much socialization, but you have to socialize to some degree with your family and the people that you're around. And so, there is something to be said for the fact that not everyone around you is partaking in this, and it becomes difficult and sort of stressful sometimes to engage in something like this if you're not used to it and you haven't done it a lot, and how that can play into your sort of social sort of mindset, psychological mindset.
That's a great question. As an approach, one thing could be, if you're going to, let's say, you're with people, sometimes it may make sense to a couple of things. Let's say you're going to a restaurant, not like we're sitting outside, but let's say if you're going to get takeout and you're meeting with friends outside, consider taking a look at the restaurant ahead of time, right? So you know exactly what you're going to eat before, and then you just order that specifically. This way you don't have to be annoying and pull out your scale and weigh it, measure it, etc., in front of your friends who never will, and then you'll end up not having any friends because they won't invite you, right? But the second thing is also consider some instances, some people bring their own food, right? If they're just going to get together with people. For those of you who know Mio was doing that when she was getting ready. I think she was getting ready for a fitness competition. So she just brought her own food, and she just went ahead and ate it and didn't make a big thing about it, etc. The thing I would also add, Joe, and thank you for raising that, is close friends and or family members who may give some people a hard time. Consider maybe having a conversation with them ahead of time and just saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm just testing this out, etc. You may actually end up enrolling them into trying exactly what you're trying. Not to say that that's your intention, but sometimes it's a way of gaining their support so that you're not derailed towards your goals in which you may be seeking.
Just to talk about our secret club, CrossFit.
Yep, exactly. Right. Exactly. You can say it's a cult, and this is what we're prescribed to eating.
That was great advice, Chris.
Thank you. What other questions do you have? I think I saw some questions in the chat. We saw.
I think they got answered.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question on. So I typically I've heard that a lot of people go through like the same cycle of, they try to gain muscle, so they eat a surplus of calories, and then they gain maybe a little bit more weight than they intended, like their weights go up, and then you go back and like try to cut calories, and then your weights drop. So that's something that I found myself doing a decent amount. Do you have guidelines for or recommendations for like what is, if you're trying to increase your weights consistently without kind of like doing like the cycle,
Mm.
how you target that?
So it's yes. So I'm going to give you the macro, and then I'm going to give you the micro answer, right? The macro answer is it's very difficult to add muscle without adding fat, and that's just the reality of how it is. The flip side of it is, Martin, is that you can go about increasing the amount of protein that you're seeking to add muscle, but you do it on a smaller increment. So let's say if you came out, or it came out that your protein will be roughly about 175 grams a day, you could basically set a baseline every 2 weeks and start increasing that protein amount, 176, 177, 178, but you do it in a 2-week incremental basis. And then you can measure to see how it feels in terms of performance and aesthetics, as opposed to making a huge jump. It's when you make a huge jump, which then it becomes very difficult in any type of, like you said, adding muscle, reducing muscle, etc. In terms of your calories. But the other thing is, really muscle, then you start getting into this level of what is called nutrition timing. And nutrition timing is, that's a whole other topic. But a lot of that has to do with when does your cortisol spike? When does it level off? And how does that impact with your sleep? And that's a sidebar conversation we can have, but I've actually had my cortisol measured. And based upon the fact that my cortisol spikes really high when I wake up in the morning, that's why I found that it was better for me to work out early in the mornings. And as much as I hated it, I used to work out in the evenings. I shifted to working out in the mornings because that's the best time for me. But that's a separate topic that we can have a sidebar conversation. If you want, you can just DM me, or we can just link up and talk about that specifically as well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Thanks.
Okay.
I got another question, Chris.
Sure, Joe.
Is anybody betting on this competition? Like wagers? That was a joke question.
Oh.
I was gonna give it to Alexis to say, Alexis, that's for you to answer. I don't know what it is, but...
I'm sure there's private bets going on. I have no idea.
I know. Don't be surprised if I make one too. So
what are you gonna do this, Joe?
I'm gonna try. You can give me the Yoda quote now. There is no try. There's do and do
no
not.
try, right?
So Chris,
Yes,
Neville.
Yes, yes, Kevin.
So this is really interesting to me. I've been through these things before, but I have never seen the precision nutrition calculator. And I just did it. And they actually have the choice. I don't know if anybody's done it yet, but they have the choice of what's your goal. Is your goal to get stronger? Is your goal to, what was it? Change your body composition, lose fat and gain muscle? Was it just to gain muscle? Was it just to lose fat? And based on that, the caloric intake was different.
Yep.
And for me, that was really interesting because actually their caloric intake that I said is because I want to change body composition was much higher than I thought it should be. Like I went into this thinking, I'm going to have to really cut my caloric intake. I was saying this to Alexis that I was cutting down on my caloric intake, but every time I do that, like Martin was saying, every time I cut way down and I lose weight, like 10 pounds, I'm not as strong. And it's really frustrating because, it's like, is a choice of being like, a fitness model or the choice of being like a power lifter. Like there just never seems to be a happy medium. So this is going to be interesting for us because, we all care about our performance levels, but I care about the way I look too and feel.
Yeah.
So it's going to be like an interesting balance of what do you give up
Yes.
for the expectation levels.
It's what I call the Oprah approach. You can have everything, you just can't have it at the same time, right? So it depends on what your goals are, right? You're right.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. I actually like the way that it told me that my calories should be higher, because I'm like, yes, I can eat more.
Side note, for your caloric, one note I just want to call out, every now and then individuals will have an allergy to certain type of carbohydrates. And if you're interested in, I didn't put it in the presentation, but feel free to take a look at something called FODMAPs, FODMAPs. And I can really geek out on what a FODMAP is, but it's actually fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. In essence, is that there's certain sugars within carbohydrates that can actually have a negative reaction to you. So if you feel like there's certain type of food, so for example, Brussels sprouts, for me, I love them, can't eat them. Why? Because it falls under the FODMAP for me. So like to look at them, maybe, but I can't, right? So just think about that in terms, if you are, for those of you who may be allergic to certain type of carbohydrates, yeah, just think about that. Feel free just to Google FODMAPs. There is actually an app that I got from the UK that is actually called, I'm pulling it up. It's an app by a university called Monash University, and it's called the FODMAP Diet. And for those of you who are interested in it, you can just go online and you can just see what, if again, for those of you who may find that there's certain type of carbohydrates in terms of fruits or vegetables that actually may impact you or give you an upset stomach, you can look at what may work for you, what may not work for you. The thing about it, it's real simple because they have a red, yellow, and green light sign to it. And it just gives you what the amounts are normally for your digestion. Also, again, consider just testing it out. It's an iterative process.
Is there a place where we can, I kind of don't completely understand this. So these are how to determine certain foods that you may have adverse reactions to, like they inflame your intestines, or that kind of stuff?
Yep.
And how do you determine what those foods are?
It's more
intuitive?
Yeah, intuitive. Okay. Everyone's gonna be different. Some people like have a stomach of steel. They can eat anything. I'm like, okay, God bless you. Me, I can't, right? So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm just like, okay, what does this mean? We can talk about I was like, all these things, or how do you,
yeah.
Where do you begin?
Yeah.
I like the first thing is like garlic, avoid entirely if possible. And you're like, what?
It just depends.
Oh, you looked it up?
Yeah, staring at it right now.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions?
Hollywood, look right when you said that, look at what I was doing.
Making garlic. Smashing garlic.
Screen back on. There you are. What is he doing with garlic? He's chopping garlic right now?
I was smashing it.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right.
Chris, I think you have a few more slides still.
Or do I? Let's go. Maybe that's in the appendix. Let's take a look at what we have in the appendix. And again, feel free, let Alexis or Karen or me know if any of you want this deck. I'll just add you to the Google Doc and then you can have it. Do you have anything in the appendix, Karen?
No, it was empty, but you still have potential signs of undereating.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. A couple of things. How do you know if you're undereating or not in terms of your caloric intake? Kevin gave us a sign insofar as that he went ahead and he looked on a calculator to calculate what his actual caloric amounts are. and you notice that it's higher. But here's some other things just to be aware of. If you're disrupted sleep, that means you're waking up 3 or 4 times at night. If you are having an inability to gain muscle, if you are chronically hungry or you're never feeling hungry, that means you have a suppressed appetite. If you're chronically feeling cold, if you have a lack of menstrual cycles or irregular menstrual cycles, something to be aware of, right? Also, if you find that you have your mood swings shift, you have a no or decreased sex drive, you have low thyroid levels, hormone levels, etc. I tend to geek out on certain things, so I get tested for everything. Like I literally have done some of these things just to see. I'm just curious. It just depends on what you're interested in, just to see where your baselines are. In some instances, you can go if you have, let's say, Kaiser as a for insurance. You can ask your primary care physician about some of these things. Some of your primary care physicians may ask you, why do you want to know? Or you can just order the stuff off the counter, over the counter, and just take the test, submit it, and send it back in. Side note, if you do take some of these tests, they ask you for a lot of saliva to spit into a tube, and they ask you for a lot of blood to actually have to pinprick yourself and give. So just be aware of that, all of that stuff. But it's given me some interesting information. Only if you're interested in that stuff. I geek out on that. Doesn't mean everyone has to.
And under eating will lead to injury.
Yes.
Because all those things lead to injury, but that is, you're more likely to injure yourself. Yep. And that actually brings me up the question. I get asked this a lot about fasting. And
intermittent fasting.
Yeah, intermittent fasting and how to make sure people aren't under eating, because that's like the concept. I'm still kind of like gray on.
Yeah, it's
how to CrossFit and fast. Yeah, really,
it's interesting because that's it's more art and science as opposed to just science, and a lot of it goes back into the question that Martin and I were speaking about earlier in terms of timing. Like when I train on an empty stomach, but I train on an empty stomach only because my cortisol is high in the morning. So it depends on what is it that you're pulling your nutrition, where's your energy coming from? So to answer your question, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I'm just going to follow what everyone else is doing. It just depends on your body type. If I try to do intermittent fasting and work out at 11 o'clock and then start eating at 12, I would be dead by probably 11:15. Not really dead, but like laying on the ground because I would have no energy. The one thing I do want to point out, going back to your question, Alexis, is that your brain actually drives or consumes the most amount of energy. So if you're in a thinking type of role, do not underestimate how many calories are being burned just from thinking alone in and of itself. So intermittent fasting, while I get it, while individuals do it, it's really, there's no set and hard rules to actually do it, and it's almost like an iterative process. You try it, see how it works for you or not. But
yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Are there more slides? Oh.
These are just some of the hand portions as I spoke about earlier. If you're ever in a pinch and you're not interested, and going back to what Joe asked before, if you're with friends and you don't want to pull out your scale, then it's just something handy to keep in mind, right? Don't actually put your hand over the food and say, right, right. Because then people would think that you're weird and nobody would want to talk to you, right? So just use your judgment.
Chris, how many grams of protein is in a serving of protein or a palm?
Roughly about four ounces. So 4 ounces are in your palm. Vegetables would be roughly about 4, and carbs would be roughly about 4 or 5 ounces in the palm of your hand. And by the way, the carbs would necessarily be, think of it in terms of potatoes or rice, something like simple carbs. By the way, fat, going back to fat, Um, Preferably what they call monosaccharide, mono type of fats, which are like coconut oil, etc. Try to stay away from vegetable type of oils. Um, just something to be aware of. Thank you, Martin, for adding that. Then you can see what the actual, just as a thumbnail sketch of what that actually may be. Again, this is for those of you who rather, instead of weighing and measuring, that could cause some anxiety for some people. Feel free just to use your hand portions. As a story, I went to Hawaii with a couple of my friends several years ago, and I was literally at Whole Foods like weighing my food with this. My friends got so tired of me, going back to Joe's point, they actually ordered me this. And they said they didn't want to be around me with the scale. So now I just like use hand portions and just quickly put it out here and just keep it on the side. I don't know, but yeah, they were annoyed with me, but I did carry my scale everywhere. So it is what it is. Right. So yeah, I am that guy. Right. So by the way, if you are geeking out on any of this information or you find this stuff interesting, these are some of the books that I've researched, read. I do find some of this stuff interesting, again, obviously, but if you find any other stuff, if you're interested in any other books, in terms of sources, references, etc., here it is. So feel free just to take a look at some of this stuff. It's quite interesting. Nutrition is quite controversial, as you can imagine. And it's also depending on who's communicating it. It could be a touch point, a hot point for many people. So
I have another question that I'd like you to talk about, because this is a performance-based challenge.
Yes.
What is the best time and what should be consumed after a workout?
Great. I'm always going to say whole foods, but I'm also going to add this. After a workout, whole foods being protein or carbs, no fat, right? And it's the same thing if you decide to go with a shake, then I would say protein and carbs, no fat. The reason being is that fat will impact the absorption of the protein into your body and the uptake after a workout. And that's basically the carbohydrates are what allows the absorption of protein into your muscles to repair your muscles after a workout quicker. But if you have fat, it actually impacts the actual absorption rate into your muscles.
And having protein only doesn't really make sense.
It does not. You need the sugar, and the sugar comes from the carbohydrates.
Yes. So that is like, if you do have a shake, make sure your shake has carbohydrates in it, or you're having like potatoes and chicken.
Yep. Who are even looking at carbohydrates, like a shake, some people go so far as to put Gatorade, like almost like powdered Gatorade or powdered lemonade or Tang. Remember Tang? Right? They even put that in their protein because it's a carbohydrate, it's sugar, and it goes right into your body. Not to say that you need to do that, but preferably always start off with whole foods first. But worst case scenario with a shake, going back to Alexis's point.
Yeah, I think my biggest flaw personally is not eating quickly enough after workout. Like I'll work out and then I'm like coaching for 3 hours and then I eat.
Yep.
So not replenishing my muscles is almost a waste of a workout.
One random bit of information added to that on the carbs, white rice actually has less carbohydrates than a lot of people think, right? So white rice actually has less carbohydrates than brown rice. White potatoes actually have less carbohydrates than sweet potatoes, believe it or not.
So is it fat? What is it?
It's just how it is.
Sure.
Like you have basmati white rice, 4 ounces roughly is about, if I'm not mistaken, it's roughly about 28.8 grams of carbohydrates, as opposed to if you have brown rice, it may be a little higher. So for those of you who are measuring, when you're measuring and thinking about food intake in terms of if you're doing macros, just something that you begin to start playing with in your mind. So it's just something that I pay attention to. I also keep oranges around. So I know like a regular orange on average, a navel orange would be about 200 grams, just the weight. And that's roughly higher. It's more carbohydrates in an orange than there is an apple. So just something to play with.
So that being said, Alexis, do you think that Chris, in order to optimize muscle gain and strength gain, we should be eating what within 1 hour after a workout? And we should be staying away from fats and trying to pump protein and carbs at the same time into our body?
Mm-hmm. I would actually say within 30 minutes after a workout.
Wow. Okay. And when you don't do that, is that a huge detriment into muscle gain?
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah, they call that the window of gains. For those of you used to bodybuilding or something like that, they call it the window of gains, that your body is, because it's the insulin at that point, that once you finish a workout, right, your insulin is low, and that's why the sugar really, any type of carbohydrates was really a sugar, is really what gives more of the uptake of the protein into your body to repair.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it matter like how much you are eating, or is it just kind of like you need to be eating a baseline amount after? Like, for example, say that, I really usually only eat like 2 meals each day. So should I be eating one of those 2 meals immediately after the workout, or like, is it fine to just do the shake?
It depends. And I say it depends because it depends on some of you may have heard, like there's an amount that people have normally said you shouldn't eat more than 30 grams of protein. Technically, that's not true, right? You can eat as much as you need, right? The problem is that often it's what are your goals and how much can you absorb at the same time, and that's very individual. So to answer your question, Martin, I don't necessarily know the answer to say, here's what, if you're only eating 2 meals a day, to say that this is what you need right now compared to someone else. It just depends on how do you feel on an individual basis. I will say, if you're getting only 2 meals and after a workout, that's a lot of food you got to eat within half an hour after a workout. That's a lot of food.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I was like, sounds like you need to have a after workout mini meal.
Yeah.
So not to draw this out any longer, but a suggestion for that, Chris, then would be, say I brought a shaker full of protein drink. It would be adding an apple or something into that, right? Because those protein drinks have very little sugar in them.
Yep.
For the powders I buy anyway.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Oh, got to start doing that.
Yeah.
Remember,
okay. I think we should. Oh, yeah. Let's wrap this up. Any last thoughts?
I saw Hina look at Gaurav, so come on, Gaurav.
Much, Chris.
Really
awesome.
I have 2 weigh scales. If anybody is interested, I can give it to them. I have an extra 2. Like, so one is a pocket scale and one is a regular scale. So we can give it.
Thanks. Okay, well, let's go back to our Sundays, y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right,
We'll
thanks,
have the
Marty.
recording. You could access it somehow. I guess we'll email the link or put the link on the socials and stuff.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you for your time.
Oh, no worries.
It was awesome.
That was
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks, Chris.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.